My mother's lawyer called on a Tuesday morning, just before lunch, while I was staring at a calendar so overbooked it looked like a game board. "Evan," he said gently, "your mother's will names you as the executor. There are some things we need to go over. And she left something for you. Someone, actually." Someone, I knew before he said it. "Her dog," I replied, rubbing the crease between my eyes. I'd seen a golden face pop in and out of our video calls for years. "Harper." He exhaled, relieved I already knew his name. "Yes, Harper. She was very clear about him." I glanced at the time in the corner of my screen. I had a meeting in 40 minutes. I had a product launch in 3 weeks. I had a life built entirely on deadlines, deliverables, and the illusion that time was something you could budget like money. "What did she say?" I asked. "She wrote it down, actually, in a letter addressed to you. But, Evan, I think you should hear this part now." She said, "Please make sure Evan knows Harper is not a thing to be divided. He is my heart with 4 legs. If Evan can't take him, please let him know there's no anger. But if he can, tell him this: Harper will help him find me. In the house, in himself." I swallowed hard. My office was too quiet. The air conditioning hummed softly above me, indifferent. "I live in a city apartment. No yard. I travel. You don't have to decide right this moment," he interrupted kindly. "But you will need to come out to the house. There are papers to sign. And he's waiting." Waiting. The word lodged somewhere behind my ribs. "How is he taking it?" I asked, before I could stop myself. "Her being gone." There was a pause. I heard papers shuffle, a chair creak. "Not well," he said quietly. "The neighbor's been checking on him. Your mom died in her sleep in her room. They say Harper lay outside her bedroom door and wouldn't move for 2 days. He's started wandering the house looking for her, sleeping in odd places. He sits at the end of the driveway at 5 every afternoon, like he's watching for someone." Watching for me, I thought, but didn't say. I pressed my thumb into the edge of my desk so hard it hurt. That tiny bit of pain felt like something solid I could hang on to.
"I'll come this weekend," I said. "I just need to shuffle a few things around." There was a longer silence on the other end this time. "Evan," the lawyer said, his voice gentle but firm, "your mother passed a week ago." I knew that. I'd gone to the funeral, flown in for 48 hours, shaken hands I barely remembered, hugged neighbors whose names I'd forgotten. I'd stood at the edge of her grave and stared at the polished wood box as if it were an invoice I'd already paid. Then I'd flown back to the city, back to the buzzing lights, the elevator voices, the constant forward motion. "I thought he should have some time to adjust," I said lamely. "That's not how dogs work," he replied softly. "He's not adjusting. He's waiting. And he's getting older. He's confused. The longer he waits, the harder this will be. For both of you." I pinched the bridge of my nose. Outside my office window, glass towers reflected a sky so pale it looked washed. "Send me whatever I need to sign digitally. I'll make arrangements for a rescue to pick him up." The words tasted like metal in my mouth. The lawyer cleared his throat. "I can do that," he said slowly. "We can find a good rescue. He'll be okay." He hesitated. "But she really did have a lot of faith in you, Evan. She talked about you constantly." "Yeah, okay, I've got to hop to another call. I'll email you." I hung up before he could say anything else. For the rest of the day, I pretended to work. I opened spreadsheets, I replied to emails, I nodded through a video meeting where a coworker's cat walked across her keyboard and everyone laughed. But every time I blinked, I saw a golden muzzle pressed against an empty bedroom door. By evening, I had a rescues website open in one tab and my calendar in another. I wrote an email to the lawyer, deleted it, wrote another, deleted that too. At 8:37 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was my mother's neighbor, Claire, the one with the lilac bushes that had always spilled over the fence into our yard. "Hi, Claire," I said, already feeling the guilt creep in. "I was just... Evan," she said, her voice tight. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're busy and you've got your life there and all, but I think you need to come." Something in her tone made my stomach drop. "What happened?" I asked. "It's Harper. He's outside, in the yard. He keeps circling the porch and whining. I let him in the house, but he scratched to be let back out. He's limping a bit. He looks... lost. I tried to get him to come into my place for the night, but he just sits at your front door. He won't leave it. I've got a blanket out here with him, but..." She broke. "He keeps staring at the driveway, like he's sure that if he just waits long enough, a car he knows will pull in." I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. My mother had once told me, in a letter written in her looping, crooked script, "Harper knows the sound of your rental car is even. He always runs to the window when an engine sounds like yours." "Is he okay?" I asked, hearing the thinness in my own voice. "As okay as you can be when your whole world disappears and no one explains it to you," she said bluntly. "He's not eating much. He sleeps by your mother's bedroom door like he's guarding it. He gets up when my husband comes by, but it's clear who he's waiting for. Me. A person who lived 3 hours and 1,000 miles of priorities away." "I'll come this weekend," I said again. But the words sounded flimsy now, like tissue paper in a storm. There was rustling on the line, and the sound of a screen door creaking open. "Harper," Claire murmured, her voice far away for a moment, soft in a way people only speak when talking to babies and animals. "It's Evan. You're Evan." I heard him then. A soft chuff, a questioning whine, the patting of paws approaching the phone. "Hey, Harper," I said, my voice breaking on the second syllable. "Hey, buddy." Silence. Then over the line I heard it. The faintest sound of claws clicking on wood as he shifted closer. A huff of breath against the speaker. A small, hopeful whine that rose and fell like a question. "You remember me, don't you?" I forced a laugh that sounded pathetic even to my own ears. "The guy who shows up a couple times a year with suitcases and leaves again." There was a sudden thump, like his body had lowered on the porch. A sigh. That sigh cut deeper than any lecture my mother had ever given me. I opened my eyes and stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. I saw a 37-year-old man with tired eyes and a tie loosened at the neck. A man whose mother was now just a framed photo in his apartment, and a contact labeled "Mom at Home" that he still couldn't bring himself to delete. And somewhere out there, on a sagging wooden porch, beneath a sky full of stars I never saw anymore, a golden retriever was lying down because he'd heard my voice through a tiny piece of glass and plastic. He believed I was closer. I believed in nothing enough to drive. "Claire," I said quietly, "I'm coming." "Now?" she asked, surprised. "Now," I said.
The drive back to the farmhouse didn't feel like the drives of my childhood. Back then, the road had meant freedom. It had been my first car, an old Honda with a dented bumper and a tendency to shudder at stoplights. It had been endless summer nights, windows down, music up, the future stretching out in front of me like the highway itself. This time, the road felt like an accusation. Every passing mile marker was a tally of all the hours I'd chosen not to make this drive. The city lights fell away behind me, replaced by long, dark stretches of interstate. The radio played softly at first, some forgettable pop song about forgetting someone. Then I turned it off. With nothing to distract me, my brain went to work. I thought about the last time I'd been at the farmhouse, the funeral, the way Harper had pushed his head into my suit jacket outside the church, his fur damp with rain and tears that weren't mine. I'd scratched behind his ears twice, then moved away to talk to someone from my mother's church about flower arrangements. I'd left the next morning, an early flight. "I'll be back soon," I'd said out loud, to him, to the house, to nobody in particular. Soon had become 7 days, 12, now 14. It was late when I finally turned off the interstate and onto the 2-lane road that led toward our old town. The streetlights here were sparse and far between, casting small islands of orange onto the asphalt. The stars above were shockingly bright, like someone had turned up the saturation on the sky. I passed the old gas station where my mother and I had once eaten microwaved burritos at midnight because she'd burned dinner trying a new recipe. I passed the corner store where she'd bought me my first ice cream after a Little League game we'd lost by a landslide. I passed places that no longer knew my name. When I turned down the gravel road toward the farmhouse, I was half expecting it to look smaller, like the houses of your childhood always do when you return as an adult. But as my headlights washed over the front porch, the chipped white paint, the familiar sag in the roofline, I felt the opposite. It looked bigger. Or maybe I just felt smaller. I pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. For a moment I just sat there, hands frozen on the steering wheel, listening to the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. Then, faint but clear in the still night air, I heard it. The scratch of claws on wood, a whine, the jingle of tags. The porch light flicked on. The front door opened a crack. Claire's silhouette appeared, backlit and haloed. And next to her, filling the doorway with golden fur and trembling anticipation, was Harper. His muzzle had more white in it than I remembered. His eyes were darker, rimmed with a kind of confusion I'd not seen before. But the moment he saw me step out of the car, his entire body seemed to vibrate. He let out a sound that was halfway between a bark and a sob. Then he surged forward. "Hold on, sweetheart," said Claire, fumbling with his collar, but he was already slipping past her, bowling into the night. He ran down the steps and straight at me. For a split second, panic flared. Old training telling me to brace, to put up a hand, to control the situation. Then he crashed into my legs with surprising force for an old dog, and all I could do was drop to my knees on the gravel. "Hey," I whispered, as he shoved his head under my chin, pressing his weight into me like he was trying to merge our bodies into one. "Hey, Harper, it's me. I'm here." His fur was coarser than I remembered, more wiry along his spine. He smelled like grass and dust and the familiar detergent my mother had always used on everything: clothes, blankets, dog beds. He whined and barked and made these little hiccuping noises that I could feel rumbling through his chest. He pulled back just enough to look at me, eyes shining wet in the porch light. Then he licked my face, fast and frantic, like he was trying to erase the distance between us with his tongue alone. "I'm sorry," I said, the words tearing out of me without permission. "I'm so sorry, buddy." For what, exactly? For not coming sooner? For not answering the calls? For every time I'd told my mother, "I'll try," when what I really meant was, "You are not my priority." All of it? None of it. Just sorry. Somewhere above us, the night insects sang their endless songs. The air smelled like damp earth and lilacs. And in the circle of the porch light, a dog forgave me. He always had.
After a long minute, Claire cleared her throat softly. "Come inside," she said. "It's late. I'll make some tea. Harper's back food and water down. He won't leave your side, but at least we can all sit." I stood, knees popping, and Harper stuck to me like Velcro, weaving between my legs as I walked up the steps. His shoulder brushed my calf with every step, as if he were afraid that if he wasn't physically touching me, I might vanish again. Inside, the house smelled exactly like my mother. Coffee and old books, a hint of lavender from the sachets she'd kept in drawers. Something savory in the kitchen that lingered even though the stove was cold. And underneath it all, something else. Emptiness. The absence of a person has a weight all its own. My eyes snagged on the details she'd changed. The new quilt on the couch, the photos on the wall that hadn't been there the last time I'd visited. But more than that, they snagged on the things that hadn't changed at all. The faded rug with the burn mark from my science project mishap in 10th grade. The dent in the wall from the time I had thrown a baseball inside. The mug on the coffee table with the chip in the rim that she'd refused to throw away because it was perfectly fine on the other side. Harper led me straight past the living room, past the dining table with the vase of wilting flowers, to the hallway. He paused outside her bedroom door. The door was half open. The darkness inside felt thick, untouched. Harper looked up at me, then down at the strip of shadow on the floor. He scratched at the wood once, twice, and then lowered his body, lying down with his front paws stretched out, nose pressed to the crack between the door and the floor. "Oh, buddy," I whispered. Claire came up behind us, holding 2 mismatched mugs of tea. She watched quietly for a moment, then spoke. "He's been doing that," she said. "Every night, every morning, any time he hears a noise that he thinks might be her." She nudged the door open with her hip. "I haven't changed anything in here. I didn't know if you'd want me to." The room smelled like her lotion and the floral perfume she had worn since I was 5. The bed was made, as always. She'd been the kind of person who made the bed no matter what, even if she was just getting back in for a nap. Her reading glasses were on the nightstand, unfolded. A book lay face down, pages fanned slightly, a bookmark resting on top instead of inside, as if she'd meant to slide it in but got distracted. "Thank you," I said to Claire, my voice rough, "for looking after him, for everything." She shook her head. "You're the one who needs the thanks," she said. "You came." Her eyes glistened. Then she squeezed my arm and backed away. "I'll leave you both for tonight. I'm right next door if you need anything. I'll bring over breakfast in the morning, for you and for him." When she'd gone,
The house settled around us with its familiar creaks and sighs. I sank down on the floor next to Harper, my back against the wall opposite my mother's bedroom door. He shifted immediately to press his side along my thigh, his body warm and solid. He laid his head on my lap and closed his eyes. "I thought about sending you away," I confessed, massaging the soft skin behind his ear, "to some nice rescue that would find you a home with people who aren't me." His ear twitched. "And for a couple of days that sounded reasonable, logical, efficient. You know how they always say not to make big decisions in the middle of grief? I took that as permission to make no decisions at all." I stared at the closed bedroom door. "But apparently you had your own opinion about that." You waited. I thought of him circling the porch, whining, sitting at the end of the driveway at 5 every afternoon, watching for me. For me. I don't know how to do this. The house, the memories, you. Harper exhaled, a soft huff that warmed my skin through my jeans. "But I'm here," I said finally. "I'm here now." His tail thumped once, slowly, against the hardwood floor.
I didn't sleep that first night. Harper dozed in fits, lifting his head every time I shifted or sighed, as if checking to make sure I was still there. Around 3 a.m., he woke suddenly, ears pricked, and let out a low, confused bark. He got up and paced to the end of the hallway, toward the front door, nails clicking on the floor. He sat there, staring at the doorknob, tail stiff. "What is it?" I asked, standing on stiff legs. He looked back at me, and then at the door again, and whined. "Does she usually—" I started, then stopped. "Did she—" I went to the door and opened it. The night air was cool and smelt of damp grass and distant rain. Harper stepped out onto the porch and looked around, nose twitching, ears flicking. He walked to the edge of the top step and sat, staring out at the dark yard as if expecting a familiar silhouette to materialize. I stood beside him, barefoot on the rough wood. "She's not coming," I said quietly. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he did, and he just refused to accept it. We stayed like that for a long time, him sitting vigil for a woman who would never again walk up the driveway, me standing beside him because I didn't know what else to do. Eventually he stood, shook himself, and went back inside. He went straight to her bedroom door, lay down, and sighed. I sat back down beside him and leaned my head against the wall. The house groaned as the temperature dropped. Somewhere outside, an owl called. In here, grief settled like dust in the corners. At some point, my eyes closed. When I woke, sunlight was slicing through the hallway window, painting bright rectangles on the floor. My neck ached. My legs had fallen asleep. Harper was awake, lying with his head on his paws, watching me. "Morning?" I croaked. He thumped his tail once, then pushed his nose into my chest, as if to say, "You're still here. Good." It struck me then how simple it was for him. She was gone. He was sad. I was here now. That was good. Sad and good could coexist in the same moment. Humans make it so much more complicated. The next few days blurred together. Claire brought food over twice a day, refusing to take money for it. "Your mother would haunt me if I did," she said, wagging a finger at me. I moved through the house like a ghost, sorting through paperwork,
calling the lawyer, making lists of things to do. Everywhere I looked, there was Harper. If I went to the kitchen, he followed, paws whispering on the tile. He lay on the braided rug while I opened cabinets, tail tapping every time I glanced down. If I sat at the dining table with a stack of farms, he lay at my feet, chin on my shoe. If I went outside to the mailbox at the end of the long gravel lane, he trotted alongside me, glancing up every few steps as if to confirm I was keeping pace. The only time he left my side was when he made his rounds. He had routines, I realized. Early in the morning, after breakfast, he'd pad out to the back of the property, to the small garden my mother had tended every spring. Even now, early flowers were staking their claim, small green shoots poking through the soil. Harper would circle the garden bed once, sniffing the turned earth. Then he'd sit beside the old wooden bench that looked out over the field. He'd sit there for a few minutes, ears perked, gaze distant, then stand and return to the house. Midday, he'd go to the front window, the one in the living room that overlooked the driveway. He'd stare out for a while, then huff and wander away. At 5 in the afternoon, he'd go to the end of the lane and sit. Always 5, not 4:58, not 5:17, 5 o'clock, like he'd swallowed a clock years ago and never forgotten its rhythm. I timed it once, just to be sure I wasn't imagining it. He sat there for exactly 23 minutes, eyes on the horizon. Then he stood, shook out his fur, and trotted back to the house, as if saying, "Not today, maybe tomorrow." "What are you waiting for?" I asked out loud on the 4th day, standing beside him at the end of the lane. He looked up at me, then back at the road. For a moment, I saw myself as a teenager turning off this road in my beat-up car, tires throwing gravel, music blaring, my mother waving from the porch. She'd waited for me too, like this. Maybe she still was, in some way. I didn't understand. Waiting for me to show up, not just physically, but fully. "Did she wait with you?" I asked Harper. "Did you both sit here, watching the road?" He didn't answer, obviously, but his tail gave a faint wag like, yes. That night, I found a small notebook in the kitchen drawer, buried under coupons and rubber bands and takeout menus. On the front, in my mother's looping script, she'd written, "Harper's Days." Curious, I opened it. Inside were dates, times, and little notes. "Sat with me on porch, 7 to 7:30 a.m., watched the sunrise. I told him about you. Waited at the driveway for 15 minutes today when the mail truck passed, thought it was you. Tail wagged so hard I thought it would fly off. Sat alone at end of the lane at 5 p.m. I watched from the window. Wonder who he's hoping to see. I dreamed about you as a boy last night. Woke up to find Harper licking my face, whining. Dogs know when we travel in our memories, I think." I flipped through page after page, months of small, quiet moments recorded like precious jewels. "He loves you, you know," she had written on one page. "He doesn't understand why you don't come more. I don't really either. But when you do, he glows. You glow. I wish I could see it from where I'm standing." I closed the notebook and pressed it to my chest. I hadn't called the rescue. I'd thought about it, more from habit than intent now. My brain liked the clean lines of a plan. Step 1, arrange care for dog. Step 2, sell house. Step 3, return to life. But each day the plan grew dimmer, less convincing. I'd started to wake up early, before the sun, and make coffee in my mother's chipped blue mug. I'd sit on the porch with Harper and watch the world lighten, colors bleeding into the darkness, dew trimming to sparkle on the grass.
I'd started taking him on long walks down the dirt road that ran past the house, his leash loose in my hand, his pace steady but unhurried. I'd started talking to him. Not nonsense, not baby talk, but real thoughts, the kind I'd never say out loud to another human. I don't know how to be the person she thought I was. I feel like I faked my way through her funeral. Like everyone else was grieving her, and I was grieving the idea of the childhood I thought I'd left behind. Harper's head tilted. I used to think coming back here meant failure. Like if I ended up living in this house, it meant I hadn't gone anywhere, done anything. That I'd somehow ended up right back where I started. Fireflies began to blink in the bushes, tiny lanterns in the gathering dark. But she loved this place, I said. She built an entire life between these walls and in these fields and at that church down the road. She knew the name of every person who walked into the grocery store. She made pies for the bake sale and blankets for babies I've never even met. She mattered here. I picked at a splinter on the step. I mattered to conference calls, to quarterly reports, to people who wouldn't show up at my funeral unless it was catered and slotted into their calendar. Harper sighed and rested his head on my foot. Maybe that's enough, I said. Maybe this is just grief talking. Or maybe I'm finally realizing something she tried to tell me in 100 small ways I never listened to. A breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere down the road, a car passed, its headlights briefly slicing through the dark. Harper's ears pricked. He lifted his head, eyes tracking the sound, until it faded completely. Then he settled, as if to say, "Continue." "I don't know what to do about you," I said, rubbing his chest. "About this house, about any of it. But I know one thing." He looked up, eyes deep and patient. "I'm not leaving you." His tail thumped hard. It thwacked against the step. Not again. The decision, once spoken, settled over me like a weighted blanket. I didn't know how it would work long term. Maybe I'd rent out my city apartment. Maybe I'd work remotely. Maybe I'd change jobs entirely, something that didn't require me to sprint on a treadmill that never stopped. But for now, I knew this. I would not take a dog whose world had already been shattered and drop him into yet another unknown. I would stay.
Grief is not a straight line. It's a circle, a spiral, a wave. Some days I moved through the house with a sense of purpose. I sorted through my mother's clothes, folding and boxing them, setting aside a few items that still smelled like her to bury my face in when no one was looking. Other days, the simplest things broke me. Finding a grocery list on the counter with Evan's favorite cereal scribbled in the margin. A voicemail saved on the landline from months ago. "Just me, honey. Call me back when you can. No rush." Her cane, leaning against the wall by the back door. She'd started using it in the last year, but had insisted on painting little flowers along the handle, turning it into something cheerful rather than a symbol of decline. Through it all, Harper was there. He seemed to instinctively know when the wave was about to crash. If I sat on the floor in the middle of her bedroom, surrounded by half-packed boxes, and suddenly found myself unable to remember what I'd been doing, he'd come in quietly and lay down beside me, his head heavy on my knee. If I stood too long in front of the stove, staring at a pot of boiling water as if it were a foreign object, he'd nosed my hand until I either turned off the burner or stirred the pot. He was, in a strange and profound way, my anchor. And in him I saw her. The way he waited by the window at certain times of day, ears pricked, was exactly how she'd sat in her chair by that same window, watching for my car. The way he'd nudge me toward the porch at sunrise mirrored the way she'd always say, "Come look at the sky, Evan, you're missing it." Even the way he cocked his head when I spoke was familiar, his expression so much like hers when she'd say, "I hear you, but I'm not sure I believe you."
One afternoon, I was in the living room sorting through a box of DVDs when I heard him in the kitchen. His nails clicked on the linoleum. There was a soft whine, then a scrape. "Harper?" I called. Another scrape. A thud. I stood and went to see what mischief he'd found. He wasn't at his bowl. He wasn't by the back door. Instead, he was in front of the narrow pantry closet by the fridge, pawing at the door. The door my mother had always shooed me away from when I was a kid, saying, "That's just my stuff. You don't need anything in there." "What are you doing, buddy?" I asked. He looked back at me, then pawed the door again more insistently. His tail wagged once, as if to say, "Here, here." I hesitated, hand on the knob. There was something sacred about the spaces our parents kept for themselves, places we'd learned not to trespass even when the owners were gone. But Harper pawed again, whining softly, then pressed his nose to the crack at the bottom. "Okay," I said, more to myself than to him. "Okay." I turned the knob and opened the door. Inside were shelves stacked with neatly labeled boxes in plastic containers. Christmas lights, tax returns 2010 to 2020, old letters. On the bottom shelf, right at nose height for a dog, was a small wooden box, the varnish worn off in places. Harper immediately stuck his head in, grabbed the box gently by the edge in his teeth, and backed out. He carried it over to me and dropped it at my feet, then sat, looking expectantly from the box to my face and back again. "You're very helpful," I said, bemused, "and mildly unsettling." I sat down at the kitchen table with the box. Harper rested his chin on my thigh, watching. Inside the box were letters. Lots of them. Some were tied together with a faded ribbon. Others were loose, edges curled, stamps yellowed. They were addressed to my mother, in a handwriting I recognized vaguely as my father's. He'd left when I was 12, a blur of slammed doors and arguments that sounded like thunder in the walls. I picked one at random and unfolded it. "Claire said you're still mad," it began. "I don't blame you. I just want you to know that I think about you and Evan every day. I don't know how to be the man you needed. I'm trying to be someone better somewhere else. That doesn't mean I stopped loving you." I felt my throat tighten. I read another, and another. They tracked years of apologies, updates, attempts at connection. "I heard Evan made the honor roll. I'm in Arizona now, working construction. I'm sober. I know that doesn't fix anything, but it's something." They stopped abruptly, about 8 years ago. The last one said simply, "I'm getting tired. If you can find it in your heart to let me see him, I'd like to meet the man he's become. If not, I understand. I hope life is kinder to you than I was." There was no reply in the box. I sat there for a long time, staring at the looping script that matched my own in odd, small ways. "Did she ever talk about him to you?" I asked Harper suddenly. He blinked. "Of course not," I said. "You're a dog. You don't have clearance for that level of family drama." But I realized then that my mother had carried something alone all these years. Regret, perhaps.
or just the ache of choices made and paths not taken. And she'd written letters of her own. I found them in a drawer in her bedroom a few days later. Unsent letters to me, scattered throughout the last decade. Some were short. I know you're busy with work, but I miss you. I'm proud of you. I wish you were here to see the sunset tonight. It's ridiculous. Others were longer, pages of memories and reflections. One in particular lodged itself under my skin. She'd written, "Sometimes I feel like Harper is a little piece of you that never left. He has your restlessness, your curiosity, the way he runs to the road whenever a car passes, hoping it's you. He does this funny thing where if I say your name, he runs to the door, tail wagging, then looks back at me like, 'Well, where is he?' He doesn't understand time zones and meetings and deadlines. He just knows that you exist somewhere that isn't here, and he's always ready for you to appear. Maybe that's what motherhood is too. Just sitting by the window of your life, waiting for your child to walk in." I read it twice. 3 times. Then I went looking for Harper. He was on the porch, head resting on his paws, watching the yard. I sat beside him and read the letter aloud. By the time I got to the last line, my vision was blurred. The words wobbled and broke. Harper shifted closer, pressing his body against mine. "I'm sorry," I said again, voice cracking. "You shouldn't have had to hold all this waiting alone." He exhaled, long and slow. "Neither of you should have."
Spring slipped into summer. Lawns grew high and then got cut. Flowers bloomed and faded. The air changed from crisp to warm and heavy. I called my boss and told him I needed more time than my bereavement leave allowed. He sighed, said all the right corporate condolences, and then, unexpectedly, asked, "Are you okay?" "No," I said honestly, "but I think I will be, eventually." He was quiet for a moment. "Take the time you need," he said finally. "We'll figure something out work-wise. This stuff, it matters." The city felt very far away. Life shrank down to simpler variables. Feed the dog, walk the dog, fix the leaky faucet, sort the boxes in the attic, call the plumber when the water heater made a strange noise. And woven through it all, like a golden thread, was Harper. He was my shadow. Sometimes literally, if I turned too quickly, I'd trip over him. He was always there, a warm, breathing constant in a world that had lost its axis. He loved water. I discovered this by accident when I turned on the sprinkler system one hot afternoon, and he bolted across the yard, flinging himself into the spray with puppyish glee, jaws snapping at the water droplets, tail a blur. He hated thunder. On stormy nights, he would pace, panting, nails clicking on the floor, until I sat down on the kitchen tiles with my back against the cabinets. Only then would he settle, crawling into my lap as if he were much smaller than the 70 pounds of trembling dog reality insisted he was. He adored car rides. Whenever I picked up the keys from the hook by the door, his ears would perk, his whole body readying itself like a coiled spring. The first time I took him into town with me, he rode in the passenger seat, nose smudging the window, breath fogging the glass. Every time we slowed near a person walking along the sidewalk, his tail wagged, hopeful, like maybe this was some elaborate scavenger hunt where the prize was you're human, but younger with fewer wrinkles.
We stopped at the little cafe where my mother had liked to get coffee on Sunday afternoons. The owner,
A woman with kind eyes and a streak of purple in her hair came around the counter to crouch in front of Harper. "Well, if it isn't the heartbreaker himself," she said, scratching his chest. "Hey, sweet boy, where's your mama, huh?" "She's gone," I said, the words still feeling like foreign currency on my tongue. "I'm her son, Evan." The woman blinked, then stood abruptly and enveloped me in a hug that smelled like espresso and cinnamon. "Oh," she said into my shoulder, "oh, honey, I'm so sorry." When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "She talked about you all the time," she said. "You know that, right? You were like this mythical creature, her city boy with the big job and the bigger heart. I was starting to think you were made up." I laughed weakly. "Sometimes it felt that way," I admitted. She gave Harper another pet. "She loved this dog something fierce," she said. "Said he kept her company once you flew the nest. Said he was the best listener she ever had. I told her she just liked him because he couldn't talk back." "She always told me the same thing about myself," I said. The woman smiled. "Well, now you've got each other," she said. "You gonna stick around?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I'm trying to figure that out." She nodded like that was the most reasonable answer in the world. "Well, while you're figuring, you come by any time," she said. "First cup's on me, for you and for him." She handed Harper a dog biscuit shaped like a bone. He took it delicately, tail wagging, then looked at me with such undisguised delight that I had to smile. Later, driving back down the familiar road with the window cracked and the summer air filling the car, Harper leaned into the wind, ears streaming back, eyes narrowed in bliss. I caught a reflection in the rearview mirror. Man and dog, framed by fields and sky, heading in a direction that, for once, wasn't entirely mapped out. Time did what time always does. It moved. Seasons rolled over us like slow waves. In the fall, the trees around the farmhouse set themselves on fire, leaves burning red and gold before dropping in damp piles that Harper loved to plow through with reckless abandon. In the winter, snow smoothed the sharp edges of the world. The farmhouse became a little island of warm light in a landscape of white. Harper's fur grew thicker, and he would bound through the drifts with the joy of a much younger dog, only to come back inside and collapse by the wood stove, heat making his fur smell faintly of sun-warmed wool. We'd found a rhythm, he and I. Mornings on the porch, coffee for me, a biscuit for him. Afternoons of chores and walks. Evenings on the couch, him with his head in my lap, me with one of my mother's old novels open on my knees, reading aloud sometimes, just to fill the space with words. I started working remotely, my job surprisingly transferable to a laptop and a decent internet connection. My coworkers got used to the occasional appearance of a golden head in the corner of the screen. "Oh my God, is that your dog?" one of them asked during a meeting once. I glanced down. Harper was leaning against my chair, chin on my thigh, eyes half closed. "He's my inheritance," I said. "Best thing I ever got." I meant it. The more time I spent with him, the more I understood what my mother had written. Harper did help me find her. Not in some mystical ghost story way, but in the everyday echoes. He led me to the places she loved, the garden, the church, the bench overlooking the field where she'd once dragged me out of bed at dawn just to watch a family of deer.
He also led me to parts of myself I'd buried. The kid who used to spend entire afternoons lying in the grass, watching clouds and imagining shapes. The teenager who'd written terrible poetry about the moon and taped it to his wall. The young man who, before he'd learned that success was measured in promotions and paychecks, had dreamed of doing something that made actual lives better, not just shareholder reports. One evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table paying bills, I realized I was content. Not ecstatic, not euphoric, just quietly okay. It startled me. Contentment had been something I'd always assigned to later. Later, when I had the right job, the right apartment, the right partner, the right bank balance. Yet here I was in a house with peeling paint and a temperamental furnace, my mother gone, and my life, plan scribbled over, and I felt more myself than I had in years. I looked down. Harper was snoring softly at my feet, paws twitching, chasing something in a dream. "Is this what you were trying to show me?" I asked the ceiling, as if my mother might be lounging up there among the cobwebs and peeling plaster. If she was, she didn't answer. But Harper snuffled and shifted, rolling onto his back, belly exposed to the vulnerable air. Which, in dog language, is an answer of its own.
Years passed. I didn't return to the city. I sold my apartment with its skyline view and stainless steel appliances. I used the money to fix the roof on the farmhouse, to insulate the attic, to install a new water heater. Sometimes late at night, I would walk through the house and touch the walls, whispering, "We're okay now, you and me." Harper grew old, truly old. His muzzle went from merely grayed to almost entirely white. His eyes grew cloudy around the edges, though they still lit up when I reached for the leash or said the word ride. He developed a slight limp in his left front leg, an old injury brought to the surface by time. The vet prescribed supplements and gentle walks. "He's had a good life," she said, scratching his neck. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." What I was doing was loving him, ferociously, imperfectly, every day. One summer evening, I watched him chase a butterfly in slow, deliberate steps, his movements more measured than they'd once been. He still tried, still leapt, but there was a softness to the arc now, a caution. He slept more, ate a little less, took longer to get up from his bed, but he still insisted on his routines. Even when his pace slowed to a shuffle, he insisted on going to the end of the lane at 5 o'clock. Some days I had to carry him halfway back, his body warm and heavy in my arms. He never squirmed, just rested his head on my shoulder and watched the road recede. "My stubborn old man," I would murmur into his fur. He would huff, which I chose to interpret as a fond agreement. He still loved car rides, though we took fewer and shorter ones. He'd stick his nose out the window at 10 miles an hour with the same bliss he'd had at 40. One early autumn afternoon, I noticed he hesitated at the porch steps. I was standing in the front yard, raking leaves into piles that he no longer ran through. He stood at the top of the steps, head tilted, as if unsure how to translate the sight of each step into the mechanics of going down them. "Hey," I called, setting the rake aside. "Need some help, old man?" His tail wagged an inch. I went to him and put a hand on his chest, another under his belly. "Okay," I said, "one at a time." He let me guide him down, his body warm under my hands. When we reached the grass, he licked my wrist once, quickly,
as if embarrassed by the assist. I swallowed, the ache in my throat. Caring for someone as they age is like watching the tide go out 1 inch at a time. You barely notice it until suddenly the shoreline is somewhere else entirely. The first time he couldn't jump onto the bed, the first time he slept through the alarm and missed sunrise on the porch, the first time he didn't race to the door at the sound of the mail truck. Little losses, each one a tiny paper cut on the heart. Then came the day I took him to the vet for a routine checkup and left with a diagnosis. Cancer. It's in his spleen, the vet said, her eyes kind but direct. At his age and with his overall condition, we can try surgery, but I don't know how much time it will really buy him. A few months, maybe. There are risks. Time. We were bargaining over scraps now. What if we don't operate? I asked, my voice sounding like it was coming from the end of a long tunnel. Then we focus on comfort, she said. Pain management. Good days. When the bad days outnumber the good, we have a conversation about helping him go peacefully. Helping him go. The phrase made my stomach twist. Harper lay on the exam room floor, head on his paws, looking up at me with trust. He didn't know what spleen or cancer meant. He just knew that I'd taken him to a place that smelled like fear and antiseptic. And I held his leash. The weight of that trust was almost unbearable. I pictured an operating room, bright lights, sharp instruments, Harper on a cold table without me, his chest rising and falling under anesthesia. I pictured him coming home with a belly full of stitches, confused and in pain. I pictured the months we might gain, the weeks, the days. I thought about his age, about how every moment now was both a gift and a countdown. "Would you do it?" I asked the vet quietly. She hesitated, then answered with the honesty I'd hoped for. "If he were my dog," she said, "I wouldn't. I'd take him home. I'd make his last weeks or months the best they can be. When he starts having more bad days than good, I'd say goodbye before he's in crisis. It's the last kindness we can give them." Kindness. My eyes burned. "Okay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Okay, we'll do that." She prescribed pain medication, gave me brochures about pet hospice services, wrote down her personal number at the bottom of the card. "For when," she said, "not if." On the drive home, I rolled down the windows, even though it was chilly. Harper's ears flapped in the wind, his eyes half closed. For a moment, he looked like the younger dog I'd first met, vibrant, unstoppable. At a red light, I reached over and cupped his muzzle in my hand. "I'm not going to let you suffer," I said quietly. "I promise." He licked my palm once, solemnly, as if accepting my vow.
The weeks that followed were both unbearably precious and excruciating. Every sunrise felt like a stolen treasure, every shared meal a banquet. I stopped working completely. My boss, surprisingly, didn't protest. "Take whatever time you need," he said. "We'll manage." My world shrank, once again, down to the house, the yard, the dog. I cooked chicken and rice and added it to his food. I laid extra rugs on the hardwood floors so his paws wouldn't slip. I bought a ramp and taught him to walk up it so he could still get into the car. We drove to the lake one last time. He didn't swim, just
stood at the edge, paws in the cool water, watching the ripples. I sat beside him and threw pebbles, watching the rings spread and fade. We visited the cafe. The owner came around the counter and sank to her knees, tears in her eyes as she hugged his neck. "You be gentle with him," she said to me, poking my chest. "He's more than a dog around here. He's your mom's echo." "I know," I said, voice cracking. At home, I brought his bed into my bedroom and set it right beside my own. At night, I could reach down and rest my hand on his head, feel the reassuring rise and fall of his breathing. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I would wake and just listen, counting breaths. 1, 2, 3. "Thank you," I'd think with each one. His decline was gradual. Some days he seemed almost like himself, trotting more than walking, tail high. Other days he was tired and slow, eyes dull, appetite small. I became hyper-attuned to his every movement. Was that just an old dog's stiffness or something more? Was that sigh contentment or discomfort? I found myself bargaining again. "Just let us have one more good day," I'd whisper to the universe. "Just one more." The universe, being indifferent to bargains, gave us what it gave us. Then came the morning when he didn't get up. It was late autumn. The air in the bedroom was cool, the kind of cold that made you not want to leave the warmth of the blankets. I woke and reached down, hand searching for the familiar shape of his head. My fingers brushed fur, but it was still. Too still. "Harper?" I asked, heart lurching. His eyes opened slowly. He lifted his head a fraction of an inch, then let it fall back onto the bed with a soft huff. I knelt beside him. "Hey," I whispered, "what's going on, buddy?" He looked at me, and in that look, I saw clarity. The kind of acceptance that animals seem to come to more easily than we do. He was tired. The kind of tired that no nap or pill could fix. I coaxed him up, eventually, but it was clear every movement was an effort. He ate a few bites of chicken, drank water, then collapsed in a patch of sunlight on the living room floor and didn't move for hours. I called the vet. "It might be time," I said, my voice breaking on the last word. She came that afternoon. "You can do it here," she'd told me months ago, "where he's comfortable, where he feels safe." Safe, for him, meant the farmhouse, the worn rug, the familiar smells. It meant me. In the hours before she arrived, I opened every window in the house. The air that came in was crisp and smelled like leaves and distant wood smoke. I made coffee I would not drink. I sat on the floor beside Harper, his head in my lap, my fingers tracing the lines of his face. "You remember when I almost sent you away?" I said, tears slipping down my cheeks, "when I thought someone else would do a better job than me?" He blinked slowly. "Thank you for not letting me," I whispered. "Thank you for waiting." The vet pulled into the driveway around 4. The light was starting to slant, golden and soft. I met her at the door. "Are you sure?" she asked gently, bag in hand. "No. Yes. I don't want him to hurt," I said. "He's not really here anymore, not in the way he was. I don't want him to have to go through some crisis in the middle of the night. He hates the car when he doesn't get to choose the destination." She nodded. "This is the last, hardest kindness,"
she said. "I know it doesn't feel that way now, but one day you'll be grateful you were able to do this for him." We set up a blanket on the floor in the living room, even though he already had a soft bed. The blanket had been my mother's favorite, faded blue with little white flowers. She used to wrap it around her legs on chilly evenings. I coaxed Harper onto it. He went willingly, though his steps were slow. I lay down beside him, curling my body around his. I could feel his heartbeat against my ribs. The vet explained the process, her voice gentle, her hands sure. She said, "First, I'll give him something to relax him. He'll get very sleepy. You can talk to him, hold him. When you're ready, I'll give the second injection. It will be quick, peaceful." Peaceful. Nothing about this felt peaceful. It felt like someone was peeling the skin off my chest.
But I nodded. "Okay," I said. "Let's do it." She inserted the needle into the vein in his front leg with practiced ease. Harper barely flinched. Within minutes, his breathing evened out. His muscles relaxed. The tension that had lived in his body for months melted away. He looked young, almost. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open, like a dog deep in dreamland. I pressed my forehead to his and breathed in his scent, grass and fur and a lifetime of love. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Remember the first night I came back? How you practically bowled me over in the driveway?" My tears soaked into his fur. "You taught me how to come home," I said. "You and Mom. You showed me that it wasn't about geography. It was about showing up for the people who wait for you." My throat closed around the next words. "I don't know where you're going. I don't know what happens now. But if there's any way at all, that there's a place where she is and you can get to her, you run to her, okay? Like you used to run to the road. Like you ran to me." His chest rose and fell steadily. "I will be okay," I lied. "Eventually. You've done your job. You kept the seat warm. You held the line. You brought me back." The vet sat quietly a few feet away, giving us space. When I finally nodded, she moved closer. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. "No," I said, honestly. I looked down at him. He looked peaceful, light, unburdened. "But he is," I added. She placed a hand on my shoulder, steadying. Then she gave the second injection. I wrapped my arms around Harper as the medicine flowed into his veins. "You are a good dog, the best boy. Thank you, thank you, thank you." His breathing slowed. There was a brief, gentle shudder through his body like a sigh. Then, stillness. The kind of stillness that is immediately, unmistakably different from sleep. I kept my arms around him. I don't know how long I lay there with my face buried in his fur, sobbing in a way I hadn't even when my mother died. Some part of me knew that this grief was tied to hers, that I was crying for all of it at once. The vet sat quietly until my sobs turned to hiccups. When I finally pulled back, my face was wet, my hands shaking. Harper looked like he was just napping. "Take your time," the vet said softly. "He's not in a hurry anymore." Eventually, she helped me wrap his body gently in the blanket. "I can arrange cremation," she said. "There's a service that will bring his ashes back in a few days." "Yes," I said, wiping my face with the back of my hand. "Please." She carried him to her car like something sacred. When she drove away, the house felt unbearably empty. No nails clicking on the floor, no soft huff from the rug. Just silence. I stumbled out to the front porch and sank down on the top step. The sky was streaked with pink and orange, the sun sinking toward the horizon. For the first time since I'd moved back, Harper wasn't sitting beside me, nose tilted toward the breeze. I pressed my palms into my eyes until I saw stars burst behind my lids. I did right by him, I said out loud, though there was no one to confirm it. A breeze moved through the trees, leaves whispering. Down the road, a car passed. I thought absurdly that I'd see a golden shape at the end of the lane, sitting vigil. There was only the empty gravel. After a while, the sky dimmed. The first stars appeared. I sat there until the air turned cold, until my fingers went numb. When I finally went inside, the living room looked wrong without his bed against the wall. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at my mother's bedroom door. I opened it. The room smelled faintly of her still, though it had faded over the years. I sat on the edge of her bed and let the memories come. Her laugh, her voice saying my name, the way she'd stroke Harker's ears and say, "We're okay, aren't we, boy? Even when we're not, we are." Grief came in another wave, but underneath it, to my surprise, was something else. Gratitude for the years I'd had with her, for the extra years with him, for the way they had conspired in their own quiet, stubborn ways to pull me back into a life that felt real.
A week later, the cremation service called. "We have Harper's ashes," the woman said gently. "Would you like us to deliver them, or will you pick them up?" "I'll come," I said. It felt right to make one last drive for him. The urn was simple, a smooth wooden box with his name engraved on a small plaque. When I brought it home, I didn't know where to put it. On the mantel, the bedside table, in the garden. In the end, I carried it out to the bench by the little patch of flowers behind the house. This had been one of his favorite spots. He'd sit here with my mother in the mornings, watching birds flit through the trees. He'd sit here with me, head on my knee, while I read. I set the urn on the bench. Then I sat beside it. "Hey," I said quietly. "Thought you might like the view." A robin hopped across the grass, head cocked. The sun was warm on my face. I reached into my pocket and pulled out one of my mother's letters, the one where she had written about him being her heart with 4 legs. I read it aloud. When I was done, I folded it carefully and tucked it into a small metal tin I'd brought with me. I set the tin beneath the bench, nestled among the roots of the big maple tree that shaded the garden. "I don't know if you two can actually hear any of this," I said, looking at the urn and the tree. "But if you can, if there's any continuity beyond my comprehension, I want you to know this. I'm staying." The words surprised me, even though I'd been moving toward them for years. "I'm not going back to the city," I said, "not full time. Maybe I'll visit, maybe I'll consult, but my life is here now, in this house, in this town." I glanced back at the farmhouse, its windows catching the light. "In the places you both loved," I added. A breeze rustled the leaves overhead. One leaf broke free and spiraled down, landing on my knee. It felt like an answer. Life went on. It always does. New routines formed in the spaces where old ones had been. I still woke early, out of habit. I still walked to the end of the lane at 5, even though there was no golden dog trotting beside me. At first, those walks hurt. The emptiness at my side was a physical ache. But slowly, the hurt softened around the edges.
I noticed the way the light changed on the fields with each season. I learned the names of birds whose songs I'd been hearing all my life without ever identifying. I started volunteering at the local animal shelter once a week. It felt like a natural extension of the promise I'd made to Harper, to not take for granted the creatures whose whole world revolves around us. At the shelter, I walked dogs who rarely saw the outside of their kennels. I sat with cats who pressed themselves into corners, eyes wide. "You're not broken," I'd whisper to them. "You're just waiting for your person." Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of a golden coat out of the corner of my eye. A dog with similar coloring. It always made my heart skip. But when I looked directly, the differences were clear. Harper had been his own singular universe. One rainy afternoon, a shelter volunteer named Mia approached me with a clipboard in hand and a cautious look on her face. "We got a new intake today. Senior, mixed breed. Had a rough go. The family surrendered him because they said he was too much work now." She rolled her eyes. "Their loss." My jaw tightened. I'd heard variations of that phrase too often. She continued, "I thought of you because you're good with the older ones, patient, and, I know you lost your guy recently. I'm not saying you should take this one home or anything, but maybe you could sit with him. He's not eating. Won't come out of the back of his run."
Grief is funny. It makes you want to close yourself off permanently to avoid ever feeling that kind of loss again. It also makes you hypersensitive to the sight of others in pain. "Okay," I said. "I'll sit with him." The dog was in the last kennel on the left. He was mostly gray, with patches of black and tan. A mutt, clearly. His fur was thin in places, his ribs faintly visible. His eyes were dull, almost resigned. He lay with his back to the kennel door, facing the concrete wall. "Hey," I said softly, crouching outside the bars. "I'm Evan. I'm not here to make you do anything you don't want to do. I'm just going to sit here for a while, okay?" He didn't move. I sat. Minutes stretched. Other dogs barked. People walked past. The shelter hummed with its usual low-level chaos. Eventually, the gray dog's ear twitched. He shifted slightly, head turning just enough that one eye could see me. "Hi," I said again. We looked at each other for a long moment. In his gaze I saw fear, confusion, but also under it all, a faint spark of hope, like a pilot light waiting for gas. "I had a dog," I said quietly. "His name was Harper. He taught me a lot about staying, about showing up. He got old, sick. I had to say goodbye." The gray dog blinked. "I'm still pretty broken about it," I admitted. "But he wouldn't want me to shut down. He'd want me to keep showing up for others, I think. He was annoyingly generous that way." The dog shifted again, inching closer to the front of the kennel. "You don't have to be him," I said. "You're you. That's enough. More than enough. But if you want someone to sit with you while you figure out what happens next, I can be that." He took a hesitant step toward me. I extended my hand through the bars, palm up. After a long pause, he lowered his head and pressed his nose lightly into my palm. His fur felt wiry. His breath smelled like neglect and fear. Something in my chest loosened. "Yeah. Okay. We can work with this." I didn't take him home that day. Or the next. Grief needed its own pacing. But
Over the following weeks, I kept visiting him. We walked in the shelter yard. He learned to trust that the leash meant we're going somewhere good instead of you're being taken away. He started eating again, wagging his tail, perking up when he saw me come in the door. Mia smiled every time she caught us together. "You know you're going to end up adopting him, right?" she said one afternoon, leaning against the fence as the gray dog, now named Gus because he'd needed a name and I'd blurted the first one that sounded solid, sniffed the grass. "I'm just fostering him," I protested weakly. She raised an eyebrow. "Uh-huh, you keep telling yourself that." Maybe she was right, maybe she wasn't. The point, I realized, wasn't whether Gus came home with me permanently. The point was that I was there now.
For him, for the others, present in a way I hadn't been once upon a time for the people and animals who had loved me.
On the anniversary of Harper's passing, I walked down to the bench by the garden with a mug of coffee and a handful of wildflowers. The maple tree's leaves were starting to turn again, edges tinged with gold and red. I set the flowers on the bench beside the urn. "I brought someone by earlier," I said, taking a seat. "Gus. I think you'd like him. He's grumpy in a way that covers up how soft he is. You were never grumpy, but you had your own cover-ups, like pretending you were hungry when you really just wanted attention." A breeze stirred, carrying the smell of earth and leaves. "I still miss you," I said, "every day. But it's softer now. The missing." I sipped my coffee. "I've been thinking a lot about something. About how you waited. For Mom. For me. For car rides that sometimes never happened. The memory of him sitting at the end of the lane, day after day, flashed in my mind. "We take for granted the way dogs wait for us," I said. "The way our parents do. We treat our absence like a pause button on their lives, like we can just slot time with them in between meetings and errands, and it'll be enough." I thought of how my mother had come out every afternoon at 5, watching the road alongside Harper, both of them holding space for a son who might or might not drive up that day. I used to think the most valuable thing I could give someone was success, status, proof that I'd made something of myself. I looked at the urn. At the end, I said, "All you wanted was for me to sit beside you, in cars that didn't move, on porches where nothing happened, on benches watching nothing in particular." A leaf, loosened from its branch, floated down and landed in my lap. "I get it now," I said softly. "Presence is the point. Not productivity, not achievements, just being there, showing up, again and again, even when it's inconvenient." I ran my fingers over the engraved letters of his name. "Harper," I said, "you waited so long for me to come home. I hope wherever you are now, you didn't have to wait at all. I hope you stepped out of this life and straight into a place where her voice called your name, and her arms were open. I hope you ran to her without any pain in your legs." A lump formed in my throat. "You didn't die waiting," I whispered. "Not in the way I feared. You died surrounded, held. Your crew was with you, like it should have been from the beginning." The light shifted, dappled through the leaves.
I sat there until the coffee cooled and the shadows grew long. When I finally stood, stretching stiff legs, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. Not the absence of pain, just the acceptance of it. The understanding that love and loss were two sides of the same worn coin, passed back and forth between beating hearts.
We tell ourselves we'll make time later. We'll visit when things calm down. We'll spend a weekend at our parents' house once the quarter ends. We'll take the dog on that trip after this busy season. We live like we have an endless supply of later. But our parents, and especially our dogs, don't measure time in quarters or fiscal years. They measure it in walks, in meals, in evenings on the couch. To them, we are not an item to be squeezed into the margins of a schedule. We are the center of the page. We are not a supporting character in their story. We are the story. My mother waited at the window for a car that didn't always come. Harper waited at the end of the lane for footsteps that sometimes never arrived. They did this not because they were martyrs, but because that's what love looks like when you don't have a dozen competing priorities. Love waits. The truth that gutted me, and then slowly put me back together, was this. They were willing to live their days around the possibility of my arrival, and for too long, I was willing to live mine around the assumption of their endless patience. I thought my absence was neutral, a blank space, something that could be filled in later. It wasn't. It was a presence of its own, a wait, a chair left empty at tables set for 3, a space on the couch warmed only by a golden body who kept glancing at the door. When I finally came home, truly came home, not just for 48 hours with a suitcase and an eye on the clock, it wasn't to a fresh start. It was to a life that had been continuing without me, stretched thin by waiting. And yet, when I walked through the door, both of them greeted me with the same fierce, uncomplicated joy. No ledger of missed calls, no tally of broken promises, just, "You're here." Dogs are like that. They don't hold grudges. They hold space. They don't ask, "Why did it take you so long?" They ask, "What do you want to do now that you're here?" Maybe that's the cruelest, most beautiful part of loving them. They forgive us faster than we learn. If there's anything I've learned from inheriting my mother's dog, it's this. Don't make the people and animals who love you most build their lives around the hope that you'll call. Show up. Not perfectly, not always with flowers or grand gestures, just consistently. Answer the phone. Drive home. Sit on the porch. Take the walk. Lie on the rug with your hand in their fur and talk about nothing in particular. Because one day, the porch chair will be empty. The rug will be bare. The dog bed will be just an indentation on the floor that you keep stepping around because you still expect it to be occupied. You will think back on all the nights you chose email over conversation, meetings over meals, deadlines over dog walks. And you will realize that you weren't just choosing productivity, you were choosing absence. I can't go back and sit with my mother on all the evenings she wished I'd been there. I can't go back and drive down that lane more often for the dog who waited at the end of it. But I can do this. I can show up now for the gray-muzzled dog at the shelter who flinches when anyone reaches for his collar, for the neighbor who waves a little too eagerly when I walk by, as if starved for conversation, for the self I still carry, the kid who wanted nothing more than to be seen, to be chosen, to be worth waiting for. Here's what I know.
now in a way that is carved into me like a name in a tree. The most extravagant thing you can spend on someone you love is not money. It's not gifts or trips or elaborate surprises. It's time. Unhurried, undivided, ordinary time. The kind spent in cars that don't move, in kitchens that smell like coffee and toast, in yards watching the sky change color. The kind spent saying, without words, "I'm here. You don't have to wait alone." If you have people or pets who are waiting for you right now, somewhere out there in a house that still smells like your childhood or a small apartment with a dog bed by the door, go to them. Not this weekend, not once things slow down, soon. Because one day you'll pull into that driveway or unlock that door and realize they're gone. And you will wish, with a longing that catches your breath, that you had given them more of the only thing they ever really wanted from you, your presence. In the end, that's what Harper gave me. Not just companionship, not just comfort, but a living, breathing reminder that I was someone's entire world. It's a humbling thing to be loved like that. It's an even more humbling thing to finally be worthy of it. So go sit in the truck, or on the porch, or beside the worn dog bed on the floor, not because you have nothing else to do, but because nothing else you could possibly do with that time will matter more.